Today's episode is all about building and growing your SaaS startup, evolving the SaaS landscape, hiring the right people, and everything in between.
You look around, there are all these ambitious women, so can't be a pipeline problem. There has to be something else that has to be done. And I wanted to do this, I wanted to solve this at scale.
Knowing your product market fit is very important for the sake of your runway.
I would think less about a product market fit, I would think about a problem market fit. I think for me, the moment when I say product market fit, product is a solution, and that solution is almost final. But what I've realized is that problems change, people change. What is a solution today might be a very different solution tomorrow.
The lack of vision or that direction leads you to a space where you're just spiraling. You are
Yeah.
just
You have to basically prove an ROI, and that's when the spiral starts for a lot of founders, right?
Sometimes, as a founder, you're married to the idea so much, you fall in love with your product or whatever you are doing, that it's very, very hard to let go.
There are lots of ideas that just die prematurely because it has not been baked and built in a certain way that it's going to be sustainable.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Uplers podcast. I am Abha. I head the brand division at Uplers, and I'm here with Anvesha, who works with me on driving impactful brand and marketing strategies. Today's episode is all about building and growing your SaaS startup, evolving the SaaS landscape, hiring the right people, and everything in between. And I'm really thrilled to have Bosky with us to talk about all of this. She's the founder and CEO of PM Dojo. After 20 plus years in product and executive leadership roles at companies like Atlassian, she's seen how tough it can be, especially for women, to break into and move up into product leadership. Often it feels like hard work isn't being noticed, and Bosky decided to change that. Amazing. She started PM Dojo to help product managers, especially women, build the skills and mindset that is needed to thrive in tech, get promoted, and earn the compensation that they deserve. PM Dojo has already helped over 1,500 women succeed in companies like Netflix, Meta, LinkedIn, and Visa. On top of that, Bosky also works with companies to help their product teams and leaders level up, sharpen their strategies, and navigate today's ever changing landscape. Born in India, now living in Bay Area with her husband, entrepreneurial, 10-year-old and a dog. Bosky's journey is inspiring, full of lessons for all of us. So I believe grab a drink, settle in, and join us as we three dive into an exciting conversation about startups, SaaS, leadership, and much, much more. Welcome, Bosky. Welcome, Anvesha.
Thank you
thank
so much for having me.
So, yes, Anvesha, anything to add? Amazing. I feel like this was such an intensive introduction. And Anvesha, anything that you would like to add?
No, I think we should dive right in because that introduction itself has so much that needs to be unfolded during this entire session. Looking forward to this for quite some time, Bosky, since our last conversation. It has been such a journey. I would say before this entire podcast came into being, there has been a journey of its own where we went through the knowing each other, understanding where we should be at. So, yes, we should dive right in and people should get to know what amazing things we are going to talk about.
Yes. So, Bosky, I think that's the very top of question that we really want to know, which is that from a product manager in Atlassian to director of growth to founder of PM Dojo. Tell us about your journey, how things unfolded, how was the experience? Tell us from working in an enterprise Atlassian to now starting your own journey with PM Dojo. And it's just not a recent journey. It's been 6 years, I believe, with PM Dojo. So you have your fair share of experience. Tell us about everything.
So I think Atlassian was a midpoint in my career. So I'd already worked for, 10, 12 plus years by the time I joined Atlassian. Atlassian was my dream company. I kept on applying to that company for 5 long years for any role that I would see in product. Every time I would get rejected. But I just wanted to work there. And eventually it so happened. And funnily enough, I was visiting India. And, back in the day, I don't know how things are, but back in the day, I remember my parents' home, we had the modem that had like the dialing sound. It would come, you had to turn off all of the phones in the house. And just before heading back, we used to live in Bermuda then. Just before heading back, we like, let's just check our email that we haven't checked for like a month. Let's just check it out. Sure behold, my husband had an email from someone that he worked with many years ago about a potential opportunity in the Bay Area. And when I opened an email, I received an email from the recruiting team at Atlassian about a role that I had not even applied for. And I was like, this is a sign, but we were planning to move back, from Bermuda to Vancouver and all of those things. I'm like, Bay Area, US, like, and I think our philosophy at that point in time was like, try it. And we're going to figure out what's going to happen. I think figure it out was like the central theme of my life. So yeah, we went through the interview process, came to Atlassian for a role that I really was not interested in or looking at the point of time, but it happened, believed that there was something out of it, worked there for a few years, amazing team, amazing company. I really struggled to work at any other company afterwards. Let's just say that they spoiled me. And I have compared every single place I have gone after that with what Atlassian is still. I still get a lump in my throat every time I talk about that company, every time I meet someone from that company. I still have really amazing relationship. My manager at the time, she visited us, 6 years after I had even left the company to be with us when my son was having his surgery back in Vancouver. So we still met her a few months ago here in the Bay Area. So I think it has a very special place. But I kind of didn't answer your question, but that was Atlassian. I left Atlassian for a very personal reason. I would have never left, just saying it from a hindsight standpoint. I don't think I would have ever left. It was a very personal reason. I wanted to just run away from the US. We went through a very crazy, scary situation with my newborn. The US healthcare system has its own challenges. I think every country's healthcare system has its own challenges, but I think as a Canadian, healthcare has a very different meaning for Canadians just because of how that process works. And I think just having gone through open heart surgeries, the surgery going bad, almost losing my newborn, I wanted to just run away. And I don't think I was thinking career at that point of time. So we decided to leave, go back to Canada, got my son much better, returned back to work. And then I worked in a few startups because startup was my thing. I just didn't realize that being a mom, a new mom, I think the startup world and me, how I thought about startup was not the same. So that was a kind of a learning. Worked in a few other companies, moved past very quickly for promotions, and then ended up in that last company where I grew very rapidly, director of product, director of growth, led an M&A, became the president of the company. And then by 2019, I think I was starting to get really frustrated with the general narrative and things that were happening. Few of them I'm just going to share. One was, I think a lot of people who wanted to get into tech or who were trying to get promoted, especially in innovation roles like product management, they were all kind of taking these theoretical courses, which was great. I'm not saying anything bad about them. They work in certain situations, but if you don't work at one of those nicely set up companies, then a lot of those things may sound great when you're learning about them, but then you come back to your day-to-day role and you are suddenly feeling like, oh my God, I'm not set up for success. My company doesn't work like Spotify or doesn't work like Atlassian or doesn't work like Google. What do I do? And so the learning wasn't just happening. And then in order to get promoted, it's not just about the hard skills. You also need to learn a lot of those meta skills and EQ. You also need to have a lot of those mindsets because someone's going to be a jerk to you. You will get no's. You will not get promoted. Your request will get denied. How do you then back up? How do you walk back up? How do you get up? How do you feel positive? So, mindset is a really, really important aspect of our personal growth. And so, I was getting frustrated that no one was teaching that. And so, I wanted to do something about it. The other thing that was really important was that I was really getting frustrated with the state of women in tech. I think everyone talks about it, but then every single place that I was talking, we all loved to talk about that topic. But we were talking the same thing. Nothing was ever getting done. Women were still leaving the workforce. And we still kind of complained about everything else that was happening. We were complaining about the pipeline. We were complaining about not that many women out there. Oh, women, motherhood. And I'm like, you look around, there are all these ambitious women. So can't be a pipeline problem. There has to be something else that has to be done. And I wanted to do this, I wanted to solve this at scale. And I knew that just being part of the executive roles and one company after another wouldn't let me do that. And so I decided to leave a nice paying, cushy job and cushy money and gave myself 3 months to figure it out again. And lo and behold, 6 years later, we are here.
That is an amazing, amazing journey. Imagine I can sense the mindset, the shift, the frustration, and the whole, there's a whole paradigm shift. I can sense the whole journey, how you must have felt in the whole process before you started PM Dojo. While you were saying it, one thing that really struck me out was you have that why this company is not like Spotify, why this company is not like this. You have that a certain mindset, especially when you work with big brand names. So that is what I want to ask before Anvesha, if she wants to ask something else. Uh, so when you work with companies like Atlassian, imagine after 6 years or more after leaving, you're still talking about the culture, the experience you have felt. You have that certain mindset that this is how structured it is, and this is how it should be because they have their policies and everything in place. Now, coming from that mindset, now you have started your own startup. You are the one who's making rules. How that shift aligns with your mission? Because you have to leave a lot of things, then you have
Yeah.
to make a lot of things. How do you, and imagine also you're hiring people in that process. So, how do you make the transition? How things happen?
So that's a great question. I think I've also realized over the years that there is this, we all talk about culture. It's more than values and mission statements and how you hire and all of that. It's almost like a DNA of the company. So it's very, very integrated into how the people in the company think, work, and especially if they have a lot of folks who are old timers. I think you can feel it. And so if you try to suddenly come in and change a company, it almost feels like you're attacking the very core of the DNA. So the immunity of the organization will start attacking you. And this has happened with me, like in some companies where I was like, oh, we need to change this, like how we do this, like we need to change this. And I think a lot of leaders, when you join a company, we want to bring in things that we liked in our previous company or somewhere else. I think you have to be very mindful about the timing of the change and how do you bring about the change and how much change is acceptable when. And that was a very hard learning for me. I think as I'm building PM Dojo, as I advise companies on a lot of these messy changes and messy transformations that happen, I don't try to make them Atlassian because I do not believe any company will just become Atlassian. Like it just won't happen, and Atlassian itself is right now not what it used to be that I remember it. The IPO has happened. One of our co-founders is no longer an active co-founder. Things have changed. The company is bigger. So I think it's also about not expecting that, but definitely there are ingredients that I like. And so that's what I try to emulate. I think one of the things, it's all about, I think, understanding when I'm working with companies, I try to understand if someone tells me, I like how Atlassian did X, how can we do that? My first question is, why do you want to do that? Right? There has to be a business problem that you want to solve. And you may believe that doing it Atlassian way or Google way or Spotify way is going to solve it, but that is a hypothesis. It may or may not be true. You have to figure out your own recipe that'll work with you, right? That is going to work within the constraints of your business. That's going to work within the constraints of how your people work and think and what you have kind of propelled over the years in your company as your own cultural DNA. Otherwise, you don't want your system to kind of completely start attacking. And that's what happens, right? Where companies hire a whole bunch of people from a certain company and everyone's trying to. So I think that is my number one rule. Like, I try to understand what is the problem, what is not getting done. And sure, a company's X's model might be something that you aspire to, but let's try to figure out how we tweak and make it work for you. How do we get those early signs that your system, your culture is ready to even accept that outside principle? And does it even solve the problem? If it doesn't, then very early we need to start tweaking and make those changes. Have never been a firm believer of like big bang projects and cultural transformations or innovation transformations and believe that it's going to be done, because we're not working with robots, we're working with people. And I think as humans, we're so deeply flawed that you have to kind of consider some of those things as well.
I really like your analogy on we are not robots. We are deeply flawed, right? Anusha?
No, no, I really resonated with what she said when Bosky was trying to talk about her journey. It's why it resonated with me is something similar to me happened when I started off my career. I was not looking for the role that I was being offered, and in all my interview processes, I kept on saying, I do not want this role. But somehow I ended up doing that role, and it started my career there. It was a big brand, and everybody around me said, you should go with it. And it just started like that. So I feel that most of the times things happen to you in life, you're not looking for it, and you are really not thinking about it, but you end up doing it anyway. And that's why it's so interesting what Bosky is saying. She wanted to be an Atlassian, or she wanted a certain pathway for herself, but in the process you evolved and you became an entrepreneur, and you started driving something which you're very passionate about. And that's something which is common with a lot of founders. They start their businesses, or they find their why for a business through those things they are passionate about, solving something. That's something which interests me. How do you, as an entrepreneur, keep your passion alive yet make those logical standings to make a very viable business out of your idea which you're conceiving? What is it that you do?
What is it that I do? Maybe it's my flawed nature. I don't know. Um, Maybe it's, all the men in my household who keep me real, including my dog. I'm the minority in my family here. Believe it or not. So people are there to like bring me to reality.
No, I think
Um,
it's a very good question because the audience that would be listening this, a lot of them are SaaS founders, and sometimes they want to know this answer because
yeah,
as a founder they are juggling between a lot of
yeah,
these
yeah.
questions within themselves. So
I can try to answer this because I think it's a very, very meaty question. I have made mistakes. So I don't think kind of looking at it like, oh, I have made all the logical decisions. No, I have not made all the I write about that a lot as well. Like, a lot of my failures, I do talk about it openly because I think it is the right thing to do. It's I've never believed in that real life that you see on Instagram and LinkedIn. I think for me, something that has been a big part of, I think, my identity, my life, how I think, um, has been from the time I was little. So I think I was talking with both of you last time when we were in like doing the introduction that I come from a middle class family. And there were a few things that I think growing up I remember from my childhood. I think one is, I think humility has been really, really important, not to the point where I hamper my confidence, but to be really grounded and not just feel like, not just pretend to be someone else, right? I think there is a lot of talk about fake it till you make it, in entrepreneurship, in just real life and career. I think I've been given that advice too, like just pretend like you know it all. And I've tried to do it, and I have really struggled with it. Not because of anything, but just because I felt like my confidence would always get shattered if I was trying to be someone else, or if I was trying to pretend that I knew the topic enough. That doesn't mean that I go in and I was like, oh yeah, I don't know anything. No. So that just meant that I had to figure out and be okay that I had to prepare a lot more, because that helped me with my confidence. And so that made me realize that, okay, so there's always a cost to any decision that I take. I can pretend to know it all, and the cost of that will be that inner conflict and my confidence not showing up. And I'll have to deal with the ramifications then and potentially later. Or there is a cost of doing that extra prep, putting in the hours, and feeling like I might lose my sleep, maybe just trying to figure it out and trying to do this and trying to do that. But then when I'm on the stage or I'm doing it, I will probably be a little bit more comfortable. And I chose the latter because for me, none of that all of that talk about, feel confidence and say it like this and own the room just didn't work with who I was. So I had to figure out, I think, what works for me. So I think staying grounded, being okay with saying, hey, I don't have the answers to that, but I'll figure it out, and definitely close the loop with the person. And it's all part of, I think, being that humble, feeling humility, feeling confident, having that integrity. And those were things that my parents taught me. Those were more important than money in my family. And I think that stayed with me. And I think that has helped over the years, just in terms of the prep work that I've had to do in lots of different places. Extra prep work, sometimes it wasn't even needed. But then I'm like, okay, I've learned something. Maybe it's going to help me, in the future. I would write down things. And I think writing helped me just clarify. Like, I hate to keep things in my head, because what I've realized over the years is that a lot of those things in my head sound great and bulletproof. But then when you start doing it, that's when the messy details emerge. And so I always like to write it. And I've always done this practice, again, thanks to my parents and the schooling, that we would always have to do this exercise every week of finding gaps in what we said or how we think. When I was a kid, of course, my analysis was deeply flawed again, not accurate and very superficial. But I think just that practice every Friday, I'm doing it. And 45 years later, I still do that. I think that has also helped me be like, okay, like what I thought may not be accurate. Let me try to figure it out. Let me go and find out how I can find those answers. So I think that has helped, again, still keeping that passion where I firmly believe in this, but then also knowing I might be wrong. So I think those two practices have always helped. And I think the third thing, we were talking about it last time as well. I've always strangely been very commercially oriented, even though money was a dirty topic in our family, right? Like, it wasn't something like, oh, we need to have lots of money. No, you need to be honest. You need to be a good person. And that is not the definition of success. But I also believe that there are lots of ideas that just die prematurely because it has not been baked and built in a certain way that it's going to be sustainable. And in order for something to be sustainable, I have seen working in startups that went bankrupt in 1 year, 2 years, where having that financial runway is really important. And sure, you can take someone else's money to build it, but then you also lose a whole bunch of control. So you got to figure out what kind of financial, um, uh, you know, management would you like in your business idea, and I think that has been, again, hugely important. So, like, I had given myself 3 months when I started PM Dojo, and I said, I don't want to just validate if this problem resonates with my target audience or who my target audience is. Of course, that is number one. But the second thing that I do want to prove is, will people pay? Because offering something for free does not prove a thing. You can sell anything. That's not selling, first and foremost. You can offer anything for free. So a lot of people said, well, just kind of put a post on LinkedIn that says, hey, I'm opening my calendar. I'm like, what does that do? Like, I don't need to even do PM Dojo, and I can still put out a post and my calendar will get filled. That doesn't prove anything. So in order for me to prove the business model, I had to make sure that, you know, the financial experiments were done and designed very, very carefully. So I think those are some of the things. I think some of it is just what I learned as a kid. Some of those practices, I think, that I still follow, knowing that I don't need to have all the answers, but believing that I can figure it out either by myself, either putting in the effort or going and asking other people who I believe might know. One thing that I've done, I think a lot of people would tell me, like, you need to go and find mentors. Sure enough, I've had people, they don't even know that they're my mentors, but they're people that I go and ask questions. But I also make sure that I'm not just asking questions to people who I know are going to cheer me up. I will always go and ask questions from at least a couple people that I know will bring me down. And I intentionally do that because I also want to know, because people who have best in their hearts for me, they will usually not see things that might become a blind spot for me. And going to those people, I'm like, okay, so this might also happen. Okay. So that helps me kind of prepare for those worst times.
I feel what you're saying, the three things that you're saying, I had this very interesting conversation with Radhika previously in one of our podcasts, and she said something very similar. Knowing your product market fit is very important for the sake of your runway,
Mhm.
because the amount of money, even if, like she said, even if you have a war chest for yourself, it won't do you any good until and unless you know what you're doing. The clarity of your product market fit helps you in telling your team as well how much the runway is going to sustain.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, and that's something, that clarity comes when you know what you're doing. And in a startup, obviously, a lot of things you're still figuring out, you're trying to understand where it is going. But I feel those 3 points which you're saying, retrospection somewhere as well, is something
It's
which is very important for all leaders, and having a sounding board.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like, I think one thing that I would say is something that I've done over many years, like when I worked in companies, was I would think less about a product market fit. I would think about a problem market fit.
Mm-hmm.
There is a slight difference in my mind how I approach the two. I think, and I'm not saying anyone who said it is wrong or anything. That's just how my thinking goes. I think for me, the moment when I say product market fit, product is a solution, and that solution is almost final. But what I've realized is that problems change, people change. What is a solution today might be a very different solution tomorrow. But if how you are approaching, how you're solving the problem based on how the market is changing, if you are very close to closing those gaps, then your solutions can evolve and pivots become a lot more easier. Because I think as humans, when we've spent any amount of effort in trying to even solve something, I think the sunk cost is something that we all kind of get stuck to. And so it's like, well, we've already spent like 6 months on it, might as well do it. I think it's very hard to kind of let go. Right? It's. I think there's a little bit of pride that comes in, ego that comes in. Who made the decision call in a company? What if now we're going to say 6 months, 1 year, 2 years later that what, maybe that decision was not right. And so I think in my mind, I've always liked to kind of stay with problem market fit. Like keep on working on the problem as problems shift, as people shift, as their needs shift, because I think building software has become such a commodity these days. It's not like what it used to be. So it's very easy for people. It's much more easier for people to switch products and tools and things like that. So, always solve the problems that your target users are facing, why they're facing, and even if something else is out there in the market, do it in a way that yours is like so much better, even if it does one small thing. Get into the hearts and minds and wallets of your users.
Yeah, true. The wallet matters.
Well, it does matter, I mean, you have to put food on your table too, right?
So I believe Bosky said one thing very, very correctly is um, that you have, it's very hard to let go of the idea because you have already spent 6 7 months and you're like, let's just do it. Sometimes I read this somewhere, sometimes as a founder you're married to the idea so much, you fall in love with your product or whatever you are doing, that it's very, very hard to let go. And there are times when as a founder, especially in the SaaS B2B arena, you have to take certain pivots because that's how journey has been. um, I want to know two things. One, as PM, as a founder of PM Dojo, did you take any pivots? And if yes, what were they? What led you to take those pivots? What were the mistakes that you were making? Secondly, you have also been advising other people building product management teams and I also want to know how you, with not just as a founder, but also as an advisory, how do you tackle people in suggesting that it's time for you to take the pivot? It's time for you to let go your present idea and now you have to take that run. How do you do that on both the aspects?
Wow. Okay. So for me, oh yeah, I made tons of mistakes. I think I am realizing it was a lot easier for me to pivot as an employee, even as a leader in a company, even though those ideas came from me or my team, than actually letting go of ideas as a founder. I'm realizing that, before I would be like, why is it so hard for my CEO and founder to kind of be like, let go? Like all the data is telling you that. It's so easy. Like, but I think, as a founder, especially, it's really hard because somewhere along the lines you almost feel like a parent, right? It's just like, if my child is like, Tanisha is doing XYZ, somewhere along the lines I'll be like, well, somehow he's seen it from me. And so it almost kind of shows, or at least the way I think of it, is it makes me question if I made a mistake, like there's a personal mistake, like maybe I messed up. I think it just goes so much more personal as a founder. And maybe that's what adds to the complexity of letting go. I think for me, I don't rip it off as a band aid because I've realized that that makes me really struggle. And I don't do it eventually. I'll just keep on thinking and pontificating about it, but I won't take the action. And so, what I start doing, a few things is like for some of our programs that I've had to decide to close and or turn it into something else in PM Dojo, I start kind of putting in less effort. So I'll put less effort in writing about it, sharing about it. I might do a simple thing is like when I have my info sessions about our programs, as an example, like there's once a week, there is an info session about each of our different programs. I will maybe reduce my availability for a program that I feel like I want to either slow down, kill. I think that's a much more easier thing for me because then I'm like, I already know the data. I already know this is not right. But then if I make it less available, and I'm the one who is in that info session, so I get to hear all the things. Like I'm very much attuned with the market realities. I just kind of give it my less time, and I'll find those less simple ways to, I think, start pulling myself away. And so then naturally, then it becomes a lot more easier for me. So I think that is something that I've done. I think, and then looking at the data, I think being in those calls with prospective students for those programs, hearing it firsthand and really doing those deep discovery also makes me, I think, realize, as opposed to hearing it from secondhand. And then, a lot of founders, especially in the early days, will be like, okay, I'm going to have someone else do the discovery calls, let them do the synthesis and analysis, give it to me. And then those founders will typically second guess, like maybe the questions were not asked, maybe they've missed something. The fact that I'm doing all of those discovery calls with my potential customers, I know the data. So there is no way of like blaming someone else that they didn't do it correctly. I know what the data is telling me. So I think I'm very close to the ground realities. And I think that's where my logical brain will come in. We'll be like, okay, I think it's time to slow it down. I may not kill it immediately, but if I know that 6 months and the data is telling me something, I'm going to be like, okay. And I think the problem market fit approach in my head of everything that I start, I'm not married to the solution. And I'm like, okay, this is what the data is telling. We'll pause it for now. Let's kind of start building something else. I'm not killing it, but if the market shifts, then we're going to reallocate the funds to that piece. So it's not killing it. It's constantly innovating. It's constantly evolving. I think there is a little bit of a power to how you reframe some of these things. Right, in your life. Same thing happens when I'm advising companies. It's not a matter of killing it. I think killing just sounds so serious. It's basically you're reinvesting your funds, your effort, your energy, your resources onto things that the data is telling you. And if you do have a gut or an instinct that is telling you otherwise, then let's try to validate that hypothesis, because maybe the data is telling us something. I've also learned this in a very hard way, that the data can tell you all the things, but you as a founder might have an instinct that is telling you otherwise. And so you got to validate that instinct or invalidate that instinct, right? And so again, for that, you have to be very close to your customers and you have to talk to them. You have to ask them, you have to probe them in a way where you're very conscious also of any kind of anchoring bias or cognitive bias that you might be doing. So again, be really good and great in asking research questions. And that's a skill to develop. A lot of times I see founders will ask questions in a very leading way. And so you are basically hearing what you want to hear.
Yeah, because once you say something, you are already putting the words
Yes.
in form of an answer to the user, and
Yeah.
hence you get back something which is not very clear, and it will not serve the purpose. So yeah, very rightly said. Phrasing your question to your target audience for the feedback, that itself is an art. Otherwise, you always would hear it would be your voice echoing
Yeah.
back to you.
You're just feeling validated, right? And then you delay making those decisions. And I think that is a lot of the coaching and advising that I do, not only with startup founders but also late stage, because the more you're in the game, I think you get more stuck into them as well. And it's hard. It's extremely hard. I have like toiled with the thing of like, what should we do about our accelerator program? Because I firmly believe, I'm seeing the data that you know that this is not the time for it, right? And that's again, so how you tell those stories to yourself is really important. If I would say, well, that's not the right program, like we should really kill it, it would make it much more harder for me. But I think the way I tell myself is, this is not the right thing where I need to put my energy. And so what else? And because you're constantly innovating and evolving, I now have those other programs to augment. If I didn't evolve, if I didn't innovate, if those early signs were something that I would have totally ignored 2 years ago, I would be stuck with this one thing. And now it would be very difficult to step away or do anything because now I'm desperate. Then when you're desperate, you're going to do everything to make it work. But if you are already like having that good enough foresight, and that's why strategy is so important. That's why looking at the data, the trends and the patterns, being very attuned to, I think, your gut, what it's telling you, because again, I think doing that retrospection where you're finding gaps in your argument always and making it a deliberate exercise to do that, I think is so important. Keeps you real, right? And then making sure that you're doing these regular discovery sessions. Like I would do something where it wouldn't be even about a program info session. I would basically, host a chai party, um, and talk to people without any agenda. Like I would be like, hey, who doesn't want to have chai, right? Food, tea, you kind of get into your deepest secrets and fears and everything, right? It's the gup shop that I think a lot of Southeast Asians we do.
Right.
And
We
you
love.
know, we love chai. I love my husband's chai. I'm a horrible chai maker. I do not know why. He thinks I do it intentionally to not get that responsibility, but I think he makes really, really good chai.
Pause.
Um,
Spoke about. I really wanted to. You spoke about canceling your accelerator program.
I haven't canceled it. I've just slowed it. I have slowed it because I wrote about it publicly on LinkedIn. I think that post went viral as well, where I said, now is not the time to be trying to transition into product management. Like, if anyone is promising you any, you know, heavenly abode by doing XY course and making the transition happen, that's not going to happen. I mean, that's a fact. Companies are not hiring first time PMs. And that's why we had to change and shift. I haven't killed it, but when people come to me wanting to join Accelerator, I'm like, what's your goal? If they tell me that they're wanting to transition, I'm like, now it's not the time to transition. But if you want to learn and use those skills in your current role, then sure, let's talk about how we can make that happen.
The way you're talking about understanding the research part and listening to the market, uh, I feel somewhere it is very hard for you because a lot of startup owners or entrepreneurs that we've been speaking to, there is not much clarity about where their actual TG is or where they would start with, because some people have brilliant ideas. I know I want to build this sandcastle and I have all my resources ready, and people are going go 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 and you're building it.
Hmm.
But then the lack of vision or that direction leads you to a space where you're just spiraling, you are
Yeah.
just going in circles. Now as as a startup owner or as an entrepreneur, what where exactly, how do you find that north star? How do you know that, my vision is making sense, it is resonating, or this will go somewhere?
The
Yeah.
ever chasing getting that North Star metric is, oh my God.
It is tough, right? And I think maybe there is a lot of it around skill set out here as well, right? Like before I became a founder, this was my job in different companies that I've done, made mistakes, got fired, got hired, got promoted, right? So this was my big 16, 17, 18 years of doing this across B2B, B2C, climate tech, ed tech, SaaS platform. So I think a little bit is out there. I don't want to make it all about like, oh, Bosky is so great. No, it's not that. But I think your perspective matters in this. This is why I always tell a lot of startup founders, like, have the humility of telling yourself, reminding yourself that you don't know everything. Just like I might not know everything about a certain problem, but then you got to go and get help, right? I was telling one of the founders the other day, we were running into this moot point where the founder is like, no, I know, Bosky, I know you've never worked in this sector, so I know. And I'm like, sure, let's look at the data. The data was clearly telling us something else, or at least was hinting that we should be asking different questions, right? We're not seeing the traction. Suddenly, you were getting 25 leads a month, and now you're getting two. Why? Right? And if every time you're going to say, well, there are too many players in the market right now, okay, but are you even one of the choices for your target user group? Do you know if it is the same target? So I think you have to ask that questions. Either you have to ask those questions yourself, or you have to be humble enough to get help from someone who is going to force you to ask some of those hard questions, right? And I told the founder, I was reminding the founder, I said, you are still extremely smart. None of that, what is happening in the market, and the fact that your leads have gone from 25 a week or 25 a month or whatever that number was to like two, It's got nothing to do with your intelligence, your smartness, or what your company is trying to do. Something is shifting. The question is, are you going to be brave enough to find out what is happening? Be the detective to find out what's happening? Are you brave enough to course correct? Or are you going to just be stuck with, oh, we're just having two, it's a sales problem? No, it's not a sales problem. You got to understand. And so I reminded him, I said, even superheroes ask for help. You're just a founder. You're no Spider Man. So if Spider Man can ask for help and you go and watch that movie, right? Then just ask for help, try out, and figure it out, right? So I think for me, a big part of it is I had seen this enough, right? This was not my first rodeo in PM Dojo. I'd seen this enough for so many years that I think that perspective has helped a tiny little bit to be like, okay, it's not about me. Like I've had to look at it objectively. I've had to remind myself to look objectively when I've failed because I'm a human. I will get bought into that thing and I will firmly believe. And it was really hard. I struggled with the accelerator piece. Like we slow down for months and months and months. And I was like, if all I'm doing, I'll give you a very tangible example. All I'm doing is getting every week 3 or 4 times on calls for an hour and telling people, hey, now's not the time. What am I doing? Like it's a waste of my time. I could be putting that time on something else. And now when I'm a mom, like there is other challenges that I have. I'm like, okay, so I think sometimes you just have to have that perspective and you have to listen to some other viewpoints. You have to ask yourself some of those hard questions, right? And you have to just kind of, I think, not go into that spiral. I think on the North Star, a lot of founders that I've talked to believe that that North Star remains constant, and it doesn't. As market shifts, as your company is evolving, that North Star might be different. And so, really figuring out what is the right North Star, right? I think a lot of startup founders, unfortunately, I think I've done the same thing too. When I would be working in companies, we would be like, oh, we just need users, and so if we get free users, great. That is a signal, but is that really the right signal? Right? If you have a freemium plan, great, but then you better have a plan for turning freemium into premium as like paid as well at some point. um, you know so what is it that you're chasing, and what is the right North Star for you? Are you chasing the North Star because 10 other buddies of yours have that same North Star? Like ask yourself the right questions. What is it? Is this important right now? Is this going to prove my riskiest assumption right now? Right? If you're trying to come up with a solution, think about how you're describing your solution. Are you describing it in a way that solves the problem in your target user's language? Or are you trying to describe what you've built because you believe that that is what needs to be built in a language that you understand, not your target user? And so I think it's basic principles, but those are also extremely, extremely hard because we all like what we hear. And that's why I also tell founders, like, if you want to solve this problem, don't just go in and chase VC money right up front. Because once you get the money, sure, it might accelerate your development, but then you have to basically prove an ROI. And that is a very different pressure because now you have to keep on finding customers. You have to do other, like, whole bunch of other things, and and that's when the spiral starts for a lot of founders, right? Um, Ultimately, it's your customers who are buying from you. You have to solve the right problem. There's a lot of pivots, which is why you need to do it so quickly and so fast, right? Like constantly, like do it in a very, if you have to do paper prototypes, if you have to do it in a completely scrappy way, do it, prove that what you're trying to do solves the problem, not what you believe, right? So I think those are some simple things. Like a lot of times when you're talking to founders and ask them, what is it that you do? Or what is it that you want to do? They will always tell me, I want to build X. And I'm like, why? Why do you want to build X? Because I really believe, I know I struggled with this. And I'm like, are you your customer? Who's your customer? So a lot of times I think
That's a golden
building,
question, who is your customer?
who is your
The
customer?
target audience, the TG is something which makes a lot of Titanic sink. I feel
Oh,
that
yeah.
a lot of founders, because what you said is so right, that I believe this solution is needed by the market. I
Yep.
believe that this solution is revolutionary. I believe that this solution is going to change lives. But does the market say that back to you? Does the market actually feel that is required? Is it just a frill, or it's a necessity? It's
Yes, absolutely. And so I think something that I do, like just one very tangible thing, something that I've done is um, when I do discovery right in the beginning. So, of course, right, I do have some sort of an instinct like, okay, this seems to be a general problem. It would be nice if there was a solution to this problem. I don't take it to heart. So, when I do my initial discovery, I will look at adjacent problems. I won't ask them, what tool do you use today? Because maybe they don't even use a tool. Maybe they do it manually. But then, like, what I would like to do is really try to understand what is happening in their day to day. So I think people need to understand that there are different granularities of doing research in the beginning. There are different levels of granularity to the problem space. If you get too close to that pain point that you believe you're trying to solve, there is the bias that will come in because you will just be so tuned to that. And maybe the people that you talk to will be like, yeah, I have that problem. But would they pay you? Would the way solving that problem, would that fit into the workflow, the day to day of that user? How many of those users are there, right? Is there something on the adjacent side that you haven't even thought about, but that is a bigger problem and a more urgent problem? And look at that and look at the patterns. And you have to do like a series of this, right? And I think a lot of times we talk about things and your users will talk about those things. And I think, and then a lot of founders will say, well, will you pay for it? And most of us would say, yeah, sure, we are going to pay for it. I think as humans, I've realized we are so, again, the flawed nature. We say things we will do, but we don't do it, right? And so maybe a better question will be like, if you do believe that that problem or that pain point has come, how much have you spent in the last 3 months to solve that pain point? That might give you a better indication than just simply asking, will you pay for it? Because now you're asking someone to tell you what they would do in the future, and no one is sitting with a crystal ball to tell you that I would do this in the future. I would much rather ask for the actions they have taken in the past. I am very attuned to looking at problems and doing multiple rounds of discovery, but very, very quick, lean discovery, because I want to disapprove things very quickly. And then I try to do a whole bunch of paper prototyping. So like, I'd like to make things tangible so that we're not just talking about things that I might be conceptualizing in a different way and my users conceptualize in a different way. And so very quickly, then I move into a paper prototyping or very scrappy back of a napkin prototyping, and start kind of validating some of that. And I can do that very quickly in 5 days. And now I suddenly have a conviction to go by, some data to go by, and then I will very quickly again put things forward, put things together in a very scrappy way to build it, and then again take it back to users. And I'll also take it to different set of users that I did not talk to, and then see, does it resonate? And I will keep quiet during those research, those
It
validation.
makes a lot of sense when you're saying, asking, which we were previously in our conversation also discussing. When you ask the questions, the art of asking the right questions is also very necessary. When you ask somebody, would you pay for this? There might be an answer which is not honest. But when you look at user behavior or user journeys, it does reveal to you, would they actually pay for your product or not? Does it make sense to them where they're dropping off? Are they actually interested in the entire module, or they're just looking at fragments and only those fragments make sense to them?
Yep, absolutely. And Brian Chesky had said this, I think, very famously many, many, many years ago, the founder of Airbnb. And he said, in the beginning, as a founder, you need to do things that don't scale. And I truly, from the core of my heart and my being, I believe that. Because a lot of times we're so eager to grow and scale, that we will just give it to someone to do it. We're going to be like, oh, we need to put all of these systems and tooling in place. And unless and until you as a founder are very close to the reality, you will start building things and have things in your head that is going to take you further away, right? So don't be so busy in scaling your company unless and until you've proven that there is something there, that you are getting traction. At the end of the day, it's all about traction, right? We get so focused on building all of our marketing systems and building all of these things that automatically stuff is going to happen, and we try to be one of those success stories that we often hear about, but we don't realize the painful moments and all of those hours and days and months and years that those successful companies have gone through, because no one talks about that. We just like to read about, or things even get published about once the success story has happened, right? The same thing happens with PM Dojo. We're talking about it 6 years later. We're not talking about all those nights where I was literally pulling my hair, I was losing my hair, I was having headache, I was crying, I was wanting to give up. I sat down and started applying to companies, went to interviews, right? We don't talk about that, do we? We talk about how everything magically turned out great.
Nobody talks about the struggle, you always talk about the journey of reaching a point. You never
Yeah.
talk about what exactly was the ground reality, or what was the turmoil like. Nobody likes,
Nobody like
publicizing their failures, or my lowest low. I would never like to, nobody likes to be in public with dripping mascara. That's a
No,
very
no, it's
pure
very
truth.
true. Those stories don't sell. And so I think a lot of times I think we look at that and then we look at before and after. And sure, it took 6 years, sure, it took 5 years, sure, it took 10 years. But I will do it now that I know these successful stories. I know it can be done. So I'm going to do it in half the time, right? So I'm not saying this is wrong or this is right, but I think you need to spend the time in the beginning and throughout your entrepreneurship journey to constantly keep validating. You have to make sure that your value prop is so much in sync that your target users are just get it. Like I'm having to rethink a lot of my messaging right now, as an example, because obviously right now, as the market is shifting in tech industry, different things are more important to people, right?
But I
um,
think those failures actually lay foundation to your experience, and somewhere it gives you the confidence to go back and revisit those when the market
And I
shifts.
think that's where the pivots also happen, basically, because you're constantly revisiting your failures, your mistakes, and then you realize, okay, it's time for me to take a pivot. We are not the founders. We are someone who simply just talks.
Yeah, no, I think maybe because I think there are many things that might go towards making that pivot decision. Of course, I think your own perspective of failed lessons, what you've seen, what you've observed, what you've talked to, what you've gone through. I think we all have that perspective, and that helps in shape and formulate our opinions of what we believe about future and present. But I think you have to look at the data, because you have to look at situations objectively and not personally. The
Definitely.
moment it's very easy to look at it personally, right? We all do that because we're all humans again, right? Like that's, you've put in your sweat and blood and tears and a whole bunch of your money, your savings, like you go all in as a founder, regardless of whether you're taking funding or not. And so to look at it by zooming out, it is a very foreign concept, and it's extremely hard, and a lot of times it's impossible. And so you need another anchor to help you see that, and a little bit of that will come from, I think, reflection, realization, a little bit of, I think, your mindset, how you think, all of that, right? So that is again a skill set, but you do need another anchor point. And for me, I think that another anchor point is data, because data will help you see things objectively, at least. But I've also seen that sometimes you can make data tell you what you want to, right? You'll be like, oh yeah, there was all this seasonality that was happening. Oh, something else happened. And I have realized that there's always something happening. in a world that was on that little blip.
But
Or
that's the beauty of the situation, when you're too attached to something, you would try justifying, even if, oh, the market does not know they're missing out on something.
I'm missing out. Yeah. And I think you just have to remind yourself. I think that's what I do. I just remind myself, like I have got these three things that are, I printed it out nicely and it's written there. It's kind of constantly reminding me. And one says, Bosky, you freaking do not know everything. So real. I need that reminder because sometimes stuff goes over my head and I think I know about something more than everyone else. But I need that real reality, that dose of reality. I have another thing out here as well, that says, um, you know, ask hard questions. You're not stupid. You're just not seeing it. Custom made because I know that these are pitfalls that I fall into. So I custom made, got it painted, and I have it up on my wall. And I will look at those. And, you know, I think that has what has helped me immensely. I might go down the route, but then, and I also always time box. So I'll always time box, right? Like I do not do like all of this analysis and all of that for more than like maybe 20, 25 minutes at a go. And then I'm going to quickly write down the summary of what I'm seeing. And then I'll just let it go. I'll go for a walk. And then I'll come back at it. And then I'm going to be like, okay, what did I miss? What did I miss? What am I not seeing? What am I not asking? Um, and I will ask that second question. And once I look at all of the data, then I get emotional about it. But at least now I have the data.
Yeah, so I have my emotions to drive me, but I have the data to pull me back to reality. I
And
think
these quotes that put me back to reality.
as a bootstrap company, when is your hiring decision coming into picture? Where do you think is the time for a company to now hire? Because scaling would always start with adding heads to your boat, and the moment you start adding those, when is that deciding factor that, okay, this is the time I should start thinking about adding more people who can take up the responsibility?
So I wish that there was a formula for every company to figure this piece out. I haven't found one. I'm not saying that there isn't, but I haven't found one because I think a lot of time it depends on what does the founder want the company to become? How fast does the founder want that company to reach that goal that they have, whether it's financially growth, whatever that is, right? Or what else might be happening? Is it time to scale? Is it time to hire? Right? I've also seen that a lot of founders feel that in order to be a legitimate founder or a legitimate company, you have to do XYZ in XYZ timeframe in order for other founders to look at you legitimately, right? Um, so I almost always, when I'm having these conversations, and for myself as well, have again, not to sound like a broken record, looked at it again more objectively, be like, okay, what do I want to achieve? What is not happening? What don't I have time for? So, as an example, one of my first hires was around the operations. I also realized that I had done all of these. I'm a product person. I love to build stuff. I love to coach. That has been something that, as a leader, I've done for my teams. That is where it makes me happy. But in the course of about 4.5, almost 5 years, I realized that I was getting so much involved into the operation side that I was having less and less time for that. As a solo founder, it was starting to hurt. It was also making me less happy. It was sucking that joy. And I had identified three things that were negotiable for me in my entrepreneurship journey so that I would not be forced to sit down and apply because obviously money was not the same. Money was far less than what I was making because I had gone into entrepreneurship when I was the president of a mid-sized company. So from financially and all of that, I was in a very, very different place. In a profitable company. And suddenly from there to go into an entrepreneurship route, that was financially a very risky move. And so for me, besides money, there had to be three things that were non-negotiable for me in this journey. And if any one of those three things would get compromised, it would be time to do some deep introspection and figure things out. That is how I roll throughout my career. That's how also I roll. Those non-negotiables have changed. And so for me, when that joy started going away, and I would basically be like, oh my God, now I'm like wasting my time because I'm obviously not good at it. In the beginning, I had to figure all of those things out. I had to learn all of that. But at some point, I was like, okay, so I have to do this. I also did not want to hire someone just from saving cost. I'm like, okay, let me find the cheapest way to get it done because I knew the quality would suffer. So if I had to pay someone good money, it meant that being a bootstrap founder, I also had to be okay with parting a big chunk of my revenue. And so I had to really interview and figure out. So the same thing happens with, and then I did make the hire, right? And it turned out the best hire. No, we parted ways after 3 months because I realized that I made the wrong decision. Then I had to figure out what do I need. And so, again, I think figuring out what do you want to do and what does that growth target look like for another founder that I'm advising, for them, it was very much in the mode that we need engineering resources, right? From scaling standpoint. And in our conversations, it came down to realization that it was not engineering resources because he could still build using several of no code and AI platforms to get it to a place where he was able to prove traction. He could use that money on something else. And so he's now using it for writing founder-led marketing. So really kind of making sure that his customers know about him more, his journey, what is he trying to do, how is he thinking, and that's where the money went, as opposed to hiring engineering resources right now because he's not at that stage of traction. So I think scale is very an interesting word because it can mean so many different things. For another founder that I'm advising, we figured that the scale is not going to come from people just yet because he's very early in his journey. We haven't even figured out who's the target user. So it doesn't make sense. He is basically scaling some of his processes on how he's going to research and get that validation in place so that he can make decisions, not by just talking to three people, right? So I think define what the scale means for you and then figure out where do you want to go, what do you like, what you don't like, know who do you want to work with, make sure that you will have time for that person because if you're so busy as a founder and so you have to now give time to that person. You can't just be doing things based on what's in your head. No one has telepathic abilities to know what's in your head. So you will have to put in processes to onboard the person to make sure that that person has the skills. You have to spend time in skilling up that person. You'll have to put in metrics for that person to know if they're successful or not. You have to meet with them on a regular basis. Make sure you have.
It is making sense in a lot of ways because I realize that the more we speak to the founders, they usually lay an emphasis on, especially hiring the first few members of the team. And a lot of times they move ahead, especially when they're hiring the first person or the third person. They have that idea, and the moment they enter the market, and the moment they start talking to them, or even if they hire a few and the working and the operational thing starts and then they realize this is not what we wanted or what my organization or what my company needs. So there are a lot of mistakes hiring in general. The whole process is time taking. It is a lot of effort. You pay a person. So what, according to you, as a person who's advising a lot of founders who are at a different stage, as a founder itself, you yourself, you're a founder, what mistakes do you usually feel that even you have made or the other founders they make when they hire, especially the first few crucial members, not just in the technical side of things, but also I believe that I'll take a few seconds to explain, but I believe that a moment you have that your startup in place, you want to market your startup to your audience, but you also want to constantly rebuild, repolish your product. and then you also you want your technical things to be in place. So how do you decide what you need? And
I can talk about some of the mistakes. I think one mistake that I see a lot, I've made it too, is hiring people like you. We all do that, right? Hiring people from the same school you went to. I see this a lot in the startup world, right? We'll just hire from our backyard university. Um, that might work well initially because you get each other, right? There is that thing there. And then suddenly you reach a point very quickly, if your startup is doing well, where you now have to bring in other people. You can't just bring everyone from that because now you need other skills because, you are early stage, then you can become growth stage, then you can become, scale stage, and then you become kind of in the midway. You need different types of skills, and so you can't just hire people who are just thinking like you, the same. And it may work at certain stages. So I think the first mistake I see is we tend to hire people who are like us, who think like us, who worked in similar companies like us. And you have to kind of, I think, really be mindful about who you bring to the table. I think the second thing is we tend to hire people with certain pedigree a lot of the times because we automatically believe if someone has worked XYZ, they must be good. Um, they probably are, but you have to ask yourself, do you need that? Right? So like I'll see a lot of companies, they'll be like, oh, we'll hire so and so from that company. And then the people in that company didn't have to work with nothing. Like you don't have budget for research, you don't have budget for this, you need very scrappy skills. So is someone who has worked in a company where they had everything, they didn't have to think that scrappiness wasn't there, would they be the right fit? I'm not making generalization, but that is the thing that you need to then test. Right? Same thing for employees as well. I will say, like, a lot of us, we reach a stage where like, oh, I've worked in all of these big companies now, and we're going to really work in these smaller companies. Are you ready for what it's going to be like in a smaller company? Right? You've worked at a certain level, you had all of these tools, you needed something to do, you had a tool. Now you don't have to. You won't get a tool. You have to do it yourself in a very manual, annoying way. Are you ready for that? I think another mistake or learning, right? Again, I think how do you say that? Because the words you use, I think it's really important. I think as a founder or as a founding team, sometimes I think these words, I think we try to fight these things that are happening just because I think our ego comes in the way as well. I think another thing that I've observed that happens quite a bit that doesn't work well or turn into their favor is we hire people, but then we haven't set them up for success. So let's say there are two founders, a co-founder, we're kind of working together. You both get each other, simple text messages, and you know exactly what needs to be done. Now you've hired someone now you have to scale how you work. It's not just people and process like tools. You have to scale how you work, right? So it's not just going to be like a text message in the morning to say, hey bud, like this thing has to be done, and the person knows what has to be done. Now you have to set that context, right? You now have to be okay with getting another point of view. It's not just the two of you or just you who knows everything or believe you know everything. Now suddenly there's a different perspective. So you have to be okay with being proven wrong or answering questions like, why are you thinking this might be right? Like, so I think those other things have to be ready, which I do see a lot of times the startups missing because and the excuse is we're moving so fast, we don't have time to set up. No one's asking you to set up like a mega bureaucratic process, but at least have those basic checks in place to make sure that whoever you bring into your company is set up for success, right? And then how do you have conversations for performance, for growth? What does that look like? Sure, you're a startup, everything is a flat organization structure. But have you put in some thinking about what does that growth journey look like for you? And how might you retain your employees at a time when ping pong tables and fancy office building is not going to be something that's going to retain their employees, right? So we live in a very different world today, right? Where those things don't matter, right? Like your office looks like a spaceship is not going to retain your employees, right? So what are you doing? And if you suddenly hire men and suddenly a woman comes in, how do you make decisions? Do you make decisions in bunk beds in the office with beer? Think about those things, think about those things when you're hiring. So I see that these things have come up so many times right now. I think there was a founder who posted on LinkedIn, or somehow I saw it, where he's like, oh, we're like, our startup culture is so awesome, something like that. I might be misquoting that, but essentially this founder and his team were all in bunk beds in the offices, sleeping in the offices with beer. And I'm like, okay, now suddenly a mom comes or a woman comes, I don't see them fitting in here at all. Forget about the golf and making decisions over golf and clubs. Like, I don't think a woman would be sleeping here in the bunk bed in the office, right? So I think there's so many different things to think about to hire and to set up your team for success.
I think that is something to actually, the moment you have given us the example, it's just something, it just feels like how a founder sets up a whole atmosphere, be it how your business is supposed to be to hiring new people and building your team. I believe, Bosky, that brings us to the end of our segment. I have, to make this fun, we have a rapid fire round where you have to answer just a few questions with one word, and let's see how things go. Are you ready?
Okay, let's try it.
Okay. So, what's that one skill? Let's just say that every SaaS founder should have in order to have a very successful startup. One skill that ever changes
Research,
whole skill.
customer insights and research.
Ooh, nice one. What's the biggest mistake a lot of founders they are making, especially when they're hiring the first few members uh, for the company?
I think we talked about it, right? I think hiring people who look like you, think like you, basically trying to hire your clones.
Uh, Third question. If you had to pick out of these, either product strategy or execution, which one is more crucial in the early days of a SaaS startup?
Execution.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
have seen so many founders pontificate in strategy land and not building anything. And when I say execution, I'm also talking about experimentation. So, yes, execution, hands down.
Okay. And what's one piece of advice you'd give to women aspiring to step into product leadership roles?
Don't let anyone tell you that it's all about confidence and taking the room if you want to move up in your leadership roles. You have to have the right skills. I know this stings to hear, but you need to have the right skills needed at that next level. And then you can work on your confidence and all of those other things. But without the right skills, you will start to feel hollow very quickly. And then everything else will fail. And then it's going to become a self fulfilling prophecy. Less confidence, less skills, being stuck. So work on the skills that are needed and believe in yourself and invest there and then move up.
Mic drop. So that brings us to the end of this segment, end of this podcast. Really, really insightful conversation, Boski. Thanks, Anvesha, for being with us here.